By 1943, the Axis seems unstoppable. Yet, just 2 years later, Hitler's empire was in ruins and Japan had surrendered. How did the Allies pull off total victory? Let's find out.
What was the importance of the Allied advance through Italy? By 1943, the Allies were looking for a new way to weaken the Axis powers and reduce the pressure on the Soviet Red Army, which was fighting Germany on the Eastern Front. The Allies were not yet ready to invade the occupied France, so they decided to attack Italy instead, one of Germany's main allies. Their aim was to push the Axis powers out of the Mediterranean and force Germany to use more of its soldiers and resources. The Italian campaign began in July of 1943 when Allied forces invaded Sicily. However, Hitler did not want to lose Italy. He ordered German troops to occupy northern Italy and prepare to fight the Allies. The new Italian government, led by General Badoglio, secretly worked with the Allies to end Italy's role in the war. The armistice was announced on 10 September 1943. Many Italian soldiers then joined the Allies and fought against Germany for the rest of the war. But the war in Italy was very hard. German forces fought hard to stop the Allied advance toward Rome. In Naples, local people fought against the German occupation and forced the German troops out of the city. In northern Italy, many Italians also began a guerrilla war against the Germans. Finally, the Allies and the faithful Italian soldiers began to move north. The invasion of Italy of a new kind has begun. It also helped remove the threat of an attack against Allied shipping at base ports in Mediterranean ports and contribute to tight German defensive forces on the Italian sector, reducing a supply in another area in the east from front. Of course, with a lot of casualties, 70,000 Allied soldiers and 500,000 Germans died, but the Allies have luckily won. By April of 1945, the end was near. Mussolini was executed by Italian partisans, and Germany surrendered in May 1945, just after Hitler's suicide. The Allied advance through Italy had not defeated Germany by itself, but had weakened the Axis powers, forced Germany to spread its resources across another battlefield, and has helped the Allies move closer to victory in Europe.
Why was Nazi Germany on the point of collapse by April 1945? By April 1945, Nazi Germany was only weeks away from defeat. One of the biggest turning points came on 6 June 1944, known as the Day. For years, Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, had asked the Western Allies to open another front in Western Europe. Finally, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the US President Franklin D. Roosevelt agreed. They launched Operation Overlord, led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The invasion took place on the beach of Normandy, France. Before the landings, Allied aircraft and warships attacked Hitler's Atlantic Wall, which is the Germany coastal defenses. Then, nearly 160,000 Allied soldiers landed on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. By 12 June, the 5 beaches had been linked together, giving the Allies a strong base in France. Although the invasion caused more than 10,300 Allied casualties, it was a major success. Over the coming months, the Allies successfully crossed Western Europe toward Nazi Germany, and the Allies soon liberated Paris in July 1944. Although in retreat, the Germans launched several powerful counterattacks, including the famous Battle of the Bulge. While the Western Allies pushed forward, the Soviet Red Army attacked from the east, and after its victory in Stalingrad, the Soviets kept forcing Germany back. In June 1944, they launched Operation Bagration, driving German forces out of Belarus and continuing through Eastern Europe. By April 1945, Soviet troops had surrounded Berlin, leaving Germany trapped between two powerful armies. Germany's defeat was not caused by battle alone, but fighting on two fronts exhausted its army and used up its supplies. Allied bombing destroyed factories, railways, and oil facilities, making it difficult to produce weapons and move troops. At the same time, the Allied continued receiving weapons and supplies through the US Lend-Lease program, helping them stay stronger for longer. With Berlin surrounded, Adolf Hitler died by suicide on 30 April 1945. By just 1 week later, on 7 May 1945, Germany signed an unconditional surrender, ending the war in Europe. But although the war in Europe was over, the Allies still had one final challenge, which was defeating Japan. Why were the Allies able to achieve victory over Japan? Although Germany surrendered in May 1945, the war in Asia was still continuing. Japan refused to surrender, so the Allies turned their full attention to the Pacific to bring the war to an end. General Douglas MacArthur led the campaign in the Southwest Pacific to retake the Philippines. The first major success came at the Battle of Guadalcanal, fought between August 1942 and February 1943. Located off the northwest coast of Australia in Guadalcanal, which is the main island in the group called the Solomon Islands. This was the Allies' first major land victory against Japan. For after months of fighting, American forces captured the island and its airfield. The victory gave the Allies an important supply base and allowed them to begin pushing Japan back across the Pacific. The Allies found a tactic of island hopping, or as known as leapfrogging, that was led by Admiral Chester Nimitz. Instead of attacking every Japanese-held island, they skipped the island with the strongest defenses and captured those that were more important. The isolated islands were cut off from food, fuel, and supplies, leaving Japanese troops unable to retrieve help. This strategy saved lives, used favored resources, and allowed the Allies to move toward Japan more quickly. The next major victory came at the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, where around 95,000 Japanese died and around 2,000 Americans. Okinawa was only about 560 kilometers from Japan, making it an ideal base for American bombers. The final turning point came when the US President Harry Truman learned about the atomic bomb when he was briefed in April 1955. Truman was at the Potsdam Conference in July that year when he received news of the successful atomic test explosion. They thought Japan would surrender if they used bombs to intimidate them to make the war shorter. So on 6 August 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, causing massive destruction, and an estimate 66,000 people were killed and 69,000 injured. However, the Japanese government still refused the US demand for unconditional surrender. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. This time, around 39,000 people were killed and 25,000 were injured. Faced with the destruction of two cities and the Soviet Union entering the war, Japan finally accepted defeat. Soon after, Emperor Hirohito announced that Japan would surrender. On 2 September 1945, Japan officially signed the surrender documents, bringing World War II to an end.
How did the Allies consolidate their victories in Germany and Japan? By May 1945, the government of Germany has ceased to function. Hitler was dead, and senior Nazis had either fled, been captured, or had died. Later, Germany was divided into 4 zones controlled by the USA, Soviet Union, Britain, and France. There were different plans for Germany in the Allied countries. Communists continued supported in Russian territory, while the USA, Britain, and France allowed parties to set up under their influence and controls according to the guidelines of democratic procedures, which also led eventually to East and West German division. The Allies also began denazification, which aimed to remove Nazi influence and punish people who had allegedly supported Hitler. Germans were investigated and placed into different categories depending on their involvement. However, the process was not always fair or consistent between the 4 zones. The most important trials of the denazification was the Nuremberg trials. Around 200 Nazi leaders has faced charges, with 22 leading officials at the center of the main trial. They were accused of crimes including murder, deportation, and crimes against humanity. In the end, 12 of them were sentenced to death, while others received prison sentences or were acquitted. The trials were important because they showed that leaders could be held responsible for serious crimes committed during war. However, Japan was treated differently. After its surrender, the USA had occupied Japan from 1945 up until 1952, led by General Douglas MacArthur. His aim was to turn Japan into a more peaceful and democratic country. Emperor Hirohito remained as an emperor because the Allies believed this would help the Japanese people to accept the surrender and the new reforms. However, his powers were greatly reduced. Japan has received a new constitution, and Article 9 prevented Japan from using war to settle international disputes. The Japanese military was also gradually disbanded. The Allies also arrested people who were suspected of war crimes. Around 5,700 suspects were tried in the Tokyo War Crimes trials, with punishments such as imprisonment to death. Finally, the Allies focused on rebuilding Japan's economy. After the Korean War began in 1950, Japan became an important supply base for United Nations forces, helping its economy recovery. In addition, the Allies not only defeated Germany and Japan, but they occupied them. They destroyed their nationalistic sentiments, removed Nazis, tried them as war criminals, helped them to become democratic, and supported the development of the economies. These actions contribute to the creation of more stable former enemies and influence the world post-1945.